I convened a family dinner with the intention of announcing the changes to my will. My daughter-in-law's smile that evening seemed a tad too enthusiastic. Then, a waitress discreetly approached and slipped me a note. "Do not drink." The warning drained the color from my face, but I managed to switch our glasses with a steady hand. What transpired next effectively put an end to her schemes for good. I'm delighted you're here to witness this. Follow my story to the end, and please leave a comment indicating the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my tale has traveled. I never would have imagined that a simple family dinner could be the thing that saved my life. At 56, I thought I had experienced enough, understood human nature well enough to discern their true motives. However, as I sat at the head of my mahogany dining table that fateful Tuesday evening, observing my daughter-in-law Sandra pouring wine with that peculiar smile on her face, I realized how wrong I had been. The crystal chandelier bathed the room in a comforting light, much like it had during the countless family gatherings my late wife, Ella Lehner, and I had hosted there. Tonight, however, the atmosphere was palpably different, thick with a tension you could cut with a knife. I had called this dinner for a specific reason, to announce some significant adjustments to my will. Given my age and recent health scares, it seemed like the responsible course of action. My son Marcus sat to my right, nervously fidgeting with his napkin. At 32, he had been married to Sandra for 3 years, and while I loved him dearly, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted within him since the wedding. He used to visit me weekly, the two of us talking about business, sports, and life in general. Now, Sandra was always present during our visits, and our conversations had become strained and formal. Sandra, on the other end of the table, was playing the role of the perfect hostess to a T. Here's the translation and rewriting, aiming for clarity, flow, and a touch of embellishment. "That might work," I said, concluding our discussion, "but it's fraught with danger if she catches on. She might escalate and try something far more direct." "I understand," Detective Collins replied. That night, sleep eluded me. My thoughts were consumed by my son, Marcus, and the devastation he would face when the truth about Sandra was revealed. He had been so overjoyed when they married, convinced he'd found his soulmate, a partner who would offer the same unwavering love and support that Eleanor had given me. Instead, he had unknowingly married a predator, someone who saw him as nothing more than a stepping stone to achieve her avaricious goals. Monday morning arrived, and I met with Harold to make significant alterations to my will. Abandoning my original plan to bequeath everything to Marcus, I instructed Harold to create a new version. This new will would allocate the majority of my estate to various charitable organizations, leaving Marcus a modest inheritance and Sandra absolutely nothing. "This is quite a departure from our discussions last year, Alan," Harold remarked, visibly surprised. "May I inquire as to what has prompted this rather drastic decision?" "Family circumstances have undergone a significant shift," I stated simply. "I now wish to ensure that my wealth is directed toward those who genuinely need it most." Harold nodded, accepting my explanation, and assured me that the revised will would be ready for my signature by the end of the week. That afternoon, Sandra called me directly, the first time in months. "Alan, I hope I'm not intruding," she began, her voice as smooth and sweet as honey. "Marcus mentioned that you weren't feeling up to my offer to bring over some soup yesterday. I just wanted to check on you." "I'm on the mend, actually," I replied carefully. "But thank you for your kind thought." Of course. The next day brought an unexpected development. Marcus called me, sounding genuinely worried. "Dad, Sandra has been acting strangely since her visit yesterday. She keeps asking if you seemed sick or confused when she saw you. Did something happen?" I chose my words carefully. "We had a perfectly pleasant visit." "Why? What's bothering her?" "She's convinced that you're getting worse, that your mental faculties are beginning to decline. She wants me to discuss the possibility of getting you some help. Someone to check on you regularly, ensure you're taking your medications properly." The pieces of the puzzle clicked neatly into place. Sandra was meticulously constructing a narrative of my mental decline, actively preparing Marcus to believe that I was becoming senile and paranoid. If I were to make any accusations against her, She could easily dismiss them as the confused ramblings of a sick old man. "I feel perfectly fine, son," I said firmly, injecting conviction into my voice. "In fact, I've been feeling better lately than I have in months." "That's precisely what worries her, Dad," Marcus said, oblivious. "She thinks you might be experiencing fluctuations, good days interspersed with increasingly frequent and severe bad days. She's genuinely concerned about you, Dad." "I appreciate her concern," I said, a wave of bile rising in my throat. "But I think I'm the best judge of how I'm feeling." After I ended the call, I realized that Sandra was drastically accelerating her timeline. She was growing increasingly concerned that I was becoming suspicious, and she was rapidly laying the groundwork to discredit anything I might say against her. This strongly suggested that she would likely attempt to conclude what she had started very soon. Detective Collins called that afternoon with a significant update. "We've spoken with Miguel Vega. He's flying in tomorrow to provide a formal statement." 2 years after Sandra's conviction, I received a heartfelt letter from a woman in Oregon whose husband had died under strikingly suspicious circumstances. She had read about Sandra's case in the news and immediately wondered if there might be a connection to her own devastating experience. Her husband's symptoms sounded eerily familiar, and his much younger new wife had conveniently inherited everything. I promptly forwarded the letter to Detective Collins, who had since been promoted to lieutenant. Within 6 months, they had gathered enough compelling evidence to formally charge the woman with murder. Sandra had inadvertently taught them her methods, but she had also, ironically, taught law enforcement how to recognize and effectively investigate this particularly insidious type of crime. That single case led to 3 more arrests in different states. Sandra's high-profile prosecution had essentially opened the floodgates, giving other grief-stricken families the courage to finally come forward with their long-held suspicions and the necessary tools to seek justice for their loved ones. On a quiet Tuesday evening, almost exactly 3 years after Sandra had first attempted to poison me at that fateful family dinner, I sat peacefully in my garden, reading a deeply touching letter from Marcus. He and Jennifer had gotten engaged and wanted to hold their wedding at my house, in the very same backyard where Eleanor and I had hosted so many joyous gatherings over the years. "I want to start our marriage in a place where love ultimately triumphed and evil definitively lost," Marcus had written. "I want Jennifer to see that our family knows how to fight for what truly matters." As I carefully folded the letter and looked out over the beautiful garden Eleanor had lovingly planted more than 20 years ago, I felt an overwhelming sense of profound satisfaction. Sandra had tried to take everything from me: my life, my son, my legacy. She was undeniably beautiful. I had to give her that. Her blonde hair was always perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, even for a simple family dinner. But tonight, something about her demeanor struck me as unusual. She kept glancing at her watch, and every time I brought up the will, her smile broadened, becoming almost intense. "Dad, you really don't need to concern yourself with all this legal stuff right now," Marcus said, cutting into a steak. "You're in good health. You have many years ahead of you." I almost laughed at the irony of his statement. Healthy. For the past 6 months, I had been struggling with a series of mysterious symptoms that had doctors baffled: fatigue, nausea, and moments of confusion that came and went like a dense fog. Some days, it felt like I was aging 10 years in a 24-hour period. "Actually, son, that's precisely why we need to discuss this," I replied, carefully watching Sandra's reaction. "These health issues I've been experiencing have made me realize I need to get my affairs in order sooner rather than later." Sandra leaned forward slightly, her green eyes shining with what I initially mistook for concern. "Oh, Alan, don't say things like that. You're going to be fine. The doctor said it might just be stress, right?" She was correct about what the doctors had said, but something in her tone bothered me. There was an eagerness there, barely concealed beneath her sympathetic words. I had built my construction company from scratch, learned to read people in boardrooms and on job sites alike. This felt wrong, fundamentally wrong. "Well, regardless," I continued, "I've been thinking about making some changes." "Significant changes." Sandra's hand tightened around her wine glass. What kind of changes? Marcus glanced between us, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was taking. Dad, maybe we should talk about this another time. Sandra's been planning this dinner all week. That statement caught my attention. Listen, I've been giving it some thought. Your health seems to fluctuate. Some days are good, others not so much. Perhaps we should establish a regular schedule where I can drop by to check on you, ensure you're taking your medication, and that you're eating properly. The predator was indeed circling, drawing ever closer. That's very thoughtful of you, Sandra, but I wouldn't want to impose. Oh, you'd never be a burden, Alan. Family takes care of family. Besides, with all these recent adjustments to your will, I want to make certain you're of sound mind and not being influenced by anyone who might not have your best interests at heart. A chill snaked its way down my spine. How did she know about the changes to the will? I hadn't yet discussed it with Marcus. What exactly are you implying, Sandra? I asked, my voice betraying none of my alarm. Oh, nothing specific. It's just that sometimes, when people aren't at their best, they can make hasty decisions. Just promise me you'll talk to Marcus and me before making any further significant changes to your estate plans. She was fishing, probing for information, desperate to uncover what I was planning. This only confirmed what I already suspected. Sandra wasn't just trying to hasten my demise for a potential inheritance. She was expecting a sizable payout. Of course, I lied smoothly. Families should absolutely be involved in such important decisions. Wonderful. I'll stop by tomorrow afternoon to check on you. I'll bring some of that herbal tea you enjoy so much. After she disconnected, I sat there, staring at the phone. The herbal tea I enjoyed so much. The very same tea that consistently made me feel worse each time I consumed it. Sandra was planning to deliver another dose of poison, and she fully expected me to drink it without question. But this time, I had a different plan brewing. I immediately called Detective Collins, briefing him on Sandra's planned visit for the following day. Apparently, he's been diligently collecting information about Sandra for the past 3 years, desperately hoping that someday he'd have the opportunity to see justice served for his brother. What kind of information? I asked, my voice filled with anticipation. Medical records documenting Robert's symptoms, insurance documents, and even some financial records that suggest Sandra had been meticulously researching Robert's assets long before they were married. Plus, he possesses photographs of Sandra methodically cleaning out Robert's medicine cabinet immediately after the funeral, supposedly to prevent any accidental misuse of his prescription drugs. This was precisely what we needed, a consistent pattern of behavior, compelling documentation, and a credible witness who had harbored suspicions from the very beginning. There's more, Collins continued. We ran a comprehensive background check on Sandra. Her real name is Sandra Elena Vargas, and she's been married 4 times. 2 of those prior husbands died under remarkably suspicious circumstances, each leaving her substantial inheritances. My blood ran cold. Sandra wasn't merely a murderer. She was a seasoned serial killer who specialized in targeting older men with significant wealth. How did she meet Marcus? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Interestingly, she secured a job at the coffee shop near his office approximately 6 months before they began dating. According to the manager, she specifically inquired about the schedules of customers who frequented the shop regularly. Asterisk, she was hunting Mr. Holloway. Asterisk, she deliberately targeted your son. The mere thought of this cold-blooded predator stalking my son, meticulously studying his habits, and meticulously planning her approach filled me with an overwhelming sense of rage. Marcus naively believed that he had fallen in love organically, but their entire relationship had been orchestrated by Sandra from the very beginning. What's our next move? Instead, she had irrevocably lost everything herself and had unwittingly given me something I hadn't expected, the absolute, unshakable certainty that I was strong enough and resourceful enough to protect the people I loved. The wedding was absolutely beautiful, a testament to resilience and enduring love. Marcus and Jennifer exchanged their heartfelt vows beneath the shade of the old oak tree, the same tree where Eleanor and I had once stood together, dreaming about watching our future grandchildren play. There were no secrets between them, no hidden agendas lurking beneath the surface, Just two genuinely good people who had consciously chosen to build a life together based on unwavering truth and unwavering trust. During the reception, Detective Collins, who had since retired from the force, pulled me aside. "You know," he said, a hint of pride in his voice, "Sandra's conviction has actually led to significant changes in how we now investigate suspicious deaths. There's an entirely new, comprehensive protocol in place for cases involving older men who die suddenly and unexpectedly after marrying much younger women. They're calling it the Vargas Protocol." "Good," I said, watching Marcus laugh and dance joyously with his radiant new wife. "Maybe that will save some other unsuspecting family from having to endure what we went through." As the evening slowly wound down and the last of the guests reluctantly departed, I stood alone in my backyard, surrounded by the lingering remnants of the joyous celebration. Strings of delicate fairy lights twinkled softly in the darkness, and somewhere off in the distance, I could faintly hear the sound of happy laughter as Marcus and Jennifer drove away to begin their much-deserved honeymoon. Sandra was safely locked away in prison, where she would spend the rest of her miserable life, unable to cause any more pain or suffering. Sandra had been planning this dinner. I had thought I was the one who had initiated it, but as I replayed the conversation from the previous weekend in my mind, I realized that she had been the one to suggest the date, the menu, even the wine selection. She had orchestrated this entire evening. "No, it's fine," Sandra said quickly, that unnerving smile never leaving her face. "I think it's wonderful that Alan wants to share his plans with family. We're all here for you. Whatever you decide." The way she uttered the phrase, "whatever you decide," sent a chill down my spine. It was too accommodating, too eager. In my experience, people who stood to benefit from decisions were never this openly supportive unless they already knew something you didn't. I excused myself to use the restroom, needing a moment to collect my thoughts and regain my composure. As I walked down the hallway lined with family photos, I caught a glimpse of Sandra and Marcus through the slightly ajar dining room door. She was leaning close to him, whispering something urgently. I couldn't quite make out the words, but Marcus looked uncomfortable, almost guilty. When I returned to the table, Sandra immediately stood up. "Let me refresh your wine, Alan. You've barely touched yours." She reached for my glass before I could respond, refilling it with deliberate care. As she poured, I noticed her hands were trembling slightly. Nerves, I told myself, but something deeper nagged at me. "Thank you, dear," I said, raising the glass but not drinking. "You know, Sandra, you've been so attentive these past few months during my health troubles, bringing me soup when I felt sick, making sure I took my medications. I really appreciate everything you've done." Her smile faltered for just a moment. "Of course, Alan, your family. I just want you to feel better." "Funny thing, though," I continued, watching her carefully. "I seem to feel worse after some of your visits." He listened intently, then outlined a strategy. "We'll have officers discreetly positioned nearby," he assured me. "If you can maneuver her into revealing information about the substances she's been administering, we'll have sufficient grounds to secure an arrest warrant. And if she remains tight-lipped, we'll need to explore alternative avenues. However, based on the information you've provided regarding her behavior, I suspect her overconfidence might lead to carelessness. Individuals like Sandra often cannot resist the urge to gloat once they believe they've secured their victory." Later that night, I phoned my son. I desperately needed to hear his voice, possibly for the last time before his world shattered around him.
"Hey, Dad.
"How are you feeling?" "Better, actually. Much better." And, remarkably, for the first time in months, that statement held genuine truth. Unmasking the cause of my illness, knowing that I wasn't succumbing to some mysterious ailment, had instilled in me a strength I hadn't felt in an age. That's wonderful news. Sandra will be so relieved. She's been genuinely worried about you. "I'm sure she has," I replied, the irony lost on my oblivious son. "Marcus, I need you to know that I love you deeply. Whatever transpires, always remember that everything I've ever done has been driven by my love for you and my desire for your ultimate happiness." There was a brief pause. "Dad, you're starting to make me uneasy. Is everything all right?" "Everything is going to be fine, son. I promise." As I ended the call, I realized I was poised to embark on the most perilous gamble of my life. The next day, I would confront my would-be assassin, attempting to coerce her into confessing to attempted murder. Success would mean Sandra's arrest and my son's agonizing discovery of his wife's true nature. Failure, however, could mean that I wouldn't live to witness another sunset. But I had resolved to no longer be a victim. I asked, steeling myself for what was to come. We're going to set up a sting operation. Based on her established pattern and what Miguel has revealed about Robert's final days, we believe Sandra is poised to conclude this very soon. She's increasingly worried that you're becoming suspicious, and she simply can't afford to delay any longer. Collins then proceeded to outline the meticulously planned operation. I was to call Sandra and feign a marked deterioration in my health, exaggerating the severity of my symptoms and conveying a sense of overwhelming fear. I would then implore her to come over immediately and bring some of her medicine to alleviate my suffering. The objective is to entice her to bring a sufficiently potent dose to cause significant harm or even death, Collins explained somberly. If she believes you're desperate and willing to ingest whatever she provides, she might grow careless and bring something overtly dangerous. And if she does, we'll arrest her the instant she hands it to you. With Miguel's sworn testimony regarding Robert, the documented pattern of suspicious deaths, and the irrefutable evidence of her attempted poisoning, we'll have an exceptionally strong and compelling case. That evening, I summoned every ounce of acting ability I possessed and called Sandra. I intentionally made my voice sound weak and shaky, exaggerating the symptoms she fully expected to hear. Sandra, I'm so sorry to bother you, but I'm feeling absolutely terrible, I said, my voice trembling convincingly. Worse than I've felt in months. I'm genuinely frightened that something is terribly wrong. Oh, Alan. Sandra's voice dripped with false concern. What's happening? What are your symptoms? Nausea, dizziness, excruciating chest pains. I tried to call my doctor, but it's already after hours. I simply don't know what to do. There was a brief pause, and Sandra was practically audible as she calculated her next move. My son was happily married to a woman who loved him unconditionally for who he was, not for what he might one day inherit. And I was alive, healthy, and surrounded by the enduring love of the family I had fought so hard to protect. Justice hadn't been swift, and it certainly hadn't been easy, but it had been thorough, it had been decisive, and it had finally been final. For the first time in years, I slept peacefully through the entire night, secure in the knowledge that the people I loved were safe, and that sometimes, when good people resolutely refuse to give up the fight, the right side really does win. The doctors can't figure out why my symptoms come and go so unpredictably. Marcus looked genuinely confused. Dad, what are you trying to say? Nothing specific, son. Just making conversation. But I wasn't making conversation. I was testing the waters, and Sandra's reaction told me everything I needed to know. Her face had gone pale beneath her makeup, and she was gripping the wine bottle so tightly her knuckles were white. The rest of dinner passed in uncomfortable small talk. Sandra kept encouraging me to eat more, drink more, always with that bright smile that no longer seemed genuine. When the main course was finished, she insisted on bringing out the dessert she had prepared specially for the occasion. As she disappeared into the kitchen, Marcus leaned over. Dad, are you feeling okay? You seem tense tonight. I'm fine, son. Just thinking about the future, about family. I paused, choosing my words carefully. Tell me, how long has Sandra been so interested in my health? It seems like she knows more about my medical appointments than I do sometimes. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. She cares about you, Dad. Is that such a bad thing? Before I could answer, Sandra returned with a chocolate cake that looked professionally made. I hope you like it, Alan. I know chocolate is your favorite. She cut generous slices for everyone, but I couldn't help but notice that she served mine first, adding extra whipped cream without being asked. As she handed me the plate, our eyes met, and for just a second, I saw something there that made my blood run cold. It wasn't love or concern, or even simple greed. It was calculation, pure and simple. I took a small bite of the cake, complimented her baking, and watched as both Sandra and Marcus relaxed slightly, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something crucial, something that would explain the growing sense of dread that had been building all evening. Sandra had chosen the wrong target, and she was about to learn precisely what kind of adversary this old construction worker could be. The only lingering question was whether I possessed the inner fortitude to see this perilous charade through to its ultimate conclusion. The following morning, I awoke with a newfound clarity that had eluded me for months. Knowing the truth about my poisoning had not only lifted a tremendous weight from my shoulders, but had also ignited within me a cold, calculating rage. Sandra believed herself clever, convinced she had found an easy target in a frail old man. She was on the verge of learning just how tragically wrong she was. Detective Collins called promptly at 9 a.m. to finalize the plan. We'll have undercover officers positioned both across the street and inside the house next door. Mrs. Patterson has graciously agreed to allow us to utilize her residence. You'll be wearing a wire and we'll be closely monitoring everything. What if Sandra senses something amiss? What if she becomes suspicious? I questioned, my anxiety mounting. We've executed countless operations of this nature, Mr. Holloway. The equipment is virtually undetectable. Simply act natural. Allow her to dominate the conversation and subtly steer it toward your health and the medications she's been providing. An hour later, a technician arrived to outfit me with the recording device. It was remarkably smaller than I had anticipated, barely noticeable once properly situated. They also provided me with a panic button, cleverly disguised as a pen, which I could discreetly activate should the situation take a dangerous turn. Remember, Detective Collins emphasized as they completed the setup, we need her to admit to providing you with substances not prescribed by your physician. If she confesses to adding anything to your food or medications, we'll have sufficient evidence for an arrest. Sandra arrived punctually at 2 p.m., as predictable as ever. Have you been taking the vitamins I brought you? Yes, but they don't seem to be helping at all. If anything, I feel even worse after taking them. That's just your body fighting the healing process, Sandra said with practiced ease. You need something stronger. I have a special tonic that might do the trick. It's far more concentrated than the vitamins. Could you bring it over? I'm really scared, Sandra. I feel like I might be having a heart attack or something. Of course. I'll be right there. In the meantime, just try to stay calm. Don't call anyone else, okay? We don't want to worry Marcus unnecessarily. If you're feeling better after you take the tonic, then there's no need to involve him. She was deliberately ensuring I would be alone, that no one else would know about her visit.
Perfect for her plan. Thank you, Sandra.
I don't know what I'd do without you. That's what family is for, she said, and I could distinctly hear the satisfaction in her voice. I'll be there in about 20 minutes. The moment I hung up, Detective Collins and his team moved into their pre-assigned positions. This time, officers would be stationed inside the house, discreetly hidden in the basement and the upstairs bedroom. If Sandra did indeed bring something dangerous, they would be close enough to intervene instantaneously. I sat in my living room, patiently awaiting my daughter-in-law's arrival, the woman who hoped to deliver my final dose of medicine. My hands were surprisingly steady now, my mind crystal clear. After enduring months of inexplicable weakness and confusion, I finally grasped the insidious plot unfolding around me. Sandra had underestimated her target. She believed she was dealing with a feeble, helpless old man, someone easily manipulated and controlled. As the night wound down and they prepared to leave, Sandra hugged me goodbye, holding on just a moment longer than necessary. Take care of yourself, Alan, she whispered in my ear. I'd hate for anything to happen to you. The words were meant to sound caring, but as I closed the door behind them and stood alone in my suddenly too quiet house, I couldn't help but wonder if Sandra's concern for my well-being wasn't quite what it seemed. Something was very wrong, and tomorrow I was going to start finding out exactly what. The next few days passed in a blur of doubt and paranoia. I found myself analyzing every interaction I'd had with Sandra over the past months, looking for clues I might have missed. The more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that something was seriously wrong. I decided to take a different approach. Instead of confronting my suspicions head-on, I would observe, gather information, and most importantly, be more careful about what I ate and drank around Sandra. The thought that someone in my own family might be causing my mysterious illness was almost too terrible to contemplate, but I couldn't ignore the evidence anymore. On Friday evening, I called Marcus and suggested we all meet for dinner at Romano's, a family-owned Italian restaurant downtown that Ella Lehner and I used to frequent. I chose a public place deliberately. If my suspicions were correct, Sandra might be less likely to try anything with witnesses around. "Dad, you don't have to take us out," Marcus protested over the phone. "Sandra was planning to cook this weekend." "I insist," I said firmly. "My treat. Besides, I want to continue our conversation from Tuesday about the will changes. There are some details I'd like to discuss in a more relaxed setting." There was a pause, then Sandra's voice in the background asking what the call was about. I heard Marcus explain, and then Sandra's bright voice saying, "That sounds wonderful. I love Romano's." She carried a shopping bag and flashed that radiant smile that I now recognized as utterly disingenuous. "Alan, you look remarkably better today," she exclaimed, kissing my cheek as she entered. "I brought some groceries and that special tea I mentioned." "You're too kind, Sandra. You really needn't go to all this trouble." "Nonsense. It's my pleasure. Besides, I know how much this tea alleviates your stomach issues." She bustled into the kitchen, and I followed closely, observing as she unpacked her bag. In addition to the herbal tea, she had included some crackers, soup, and a bottle of what appeared to be some sort of health tonic. "What's that?" I inquired, pointing to the ominous-looking dark bottle. "Oh, this is simply wonderful." Sandra's eyes lit up with artificial enthusiasm. "It's a natural energy supplement. I've been researching remedies for fatigue, and this one came highly recommended. All natural ingredients, completely safe." "I'll bet," I thought grimly. "That's very thoughtful of you." Sandra commenced preparing the tea, humming softly to herself. She seemed completely at ease, exuding confidence in her well-rehearsed routine. As the water heated, she engaged in casual conversation about Marcus, his job, and their shared plans for the future. "You know, Alan, Marcus, and I have been discussing the possibility of starting a family soon," she announced casually. "Of course, we want to ensure we're financially stable first. It's frightfully expensive to raise children these days." "I'm sure you'll figure it out," I replied, inwardly wondering if she was plotting to utilize my inheritance to finance her grand family plans. "Well, we're certainly hoping we won't have to be overly concerned about money for much longer," she said with a meaningful glance. "Marcus will eventually inherit your construction company, and, of course, there's your life insurance and savings." There it was, the first overt glimpse into her true motivations. Instead, she was about to confront a fighter, a man who had built a thriving construction empire from absolutely nothing, and who was damn well not about to let some gold-digging murderer destroy his family and legacy. 23 minutes later, Sandra knocked on my door. When I opened it, she was carrying a small leather bag and wearing an expression of overly dramatic concern. "Oh, Alan, you look absolutely terrible," she exclaimed, rushing inside. "I'm so glad you called me." "I've been feeling steadily worse since you left yesterday," I said, feigning weakness. "Whatever's wrong with me, it's getting bad very quickly." Sandra opened her bag and pulled out a small, dark bottle, conspicuously devoid of any label. "This is very concentrated," she said, carefully unscrewing the cap. "It might taste bitter, but you absolutely have to drink all of it. It's the only thing that's going to help you now." I stared intently at the bottle, knowing with chilling certainty that whatever lurked inside was intended to kill me. Sandra stood there in my living room, holding my death in her hands, a sinister smile playing on her lips. "Are you absolutely sure this is safe?" I asked, deliberately hesitating as I took the bottle from her. "Absolutely," Sandra said, her eyes gleaming with anticipatory excitement. "Just drink it down quickly. It works fast." I lifted the bottle to my lips, and Sandra leaned forward slightly, watching with predatory intensity. That's when Detective Collins and his team simultaneously burst through the front and back doors. "Police! Everyone freeze!" Sandra spun around, her face instantly drained of color, white as a sheet. The bottle slipped from my trembling hands, crashing onto the hardwood floor and shattering, its deadly contents spreading in a dark, ominous stain across the polished surface. "Sandra Vargas, you're under arrest for attempted murder," Detective Collins announced, pulling out his handcuffs with decisive finality. The enthusiasm in her voice made my stomach turn. Was she excited about another opportunity? To what exactly? Poison me? The thought seemed absurd, even as it formed in my mind, but I couldn't shake it. Saturday evening arrived, and I made sure to get to Romano's early. I wanted to choose our table somewhere with good visibility and near the kitchen where the staff would be frequently passing by. Old habits from my construction days. Always survey the site before the important meetings. Marcus and Sandra arrived 20 minutes later. Sandra looked stunning as usual, wearing a black dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. She hugged me warmly, and I found myself tensing at her touch. "You look tired, Alan," she said, studying my face with what appeared to be genuine concern. "Have you been sleeping well?" "About as well as can be expected," I replied carefully. The symptoms come and go. We were seated at a corner table with burgundy leather banquettes. The restaurant was busy, filled with the comfortable chatter of families and couples enjoying their weekend evening. Our waitress was a young woman named Maria, who couldn't have been more than 25, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and tired eyes that suggested she was working her way through college. As we perused the menus, Sandra kept steering the conversation back to my health and my legal affairs. "So, Alan, you mentioned making changes to your will. Have you spoken with your lawyer yet?" "I have an appointment with Harold next week," I said, referring to Harold Brennan, who had been handling my legal affairs for over 15 years. "Just want to make sure everything is in order." Sandra nodded approvingly. "That's very responsible of you. Estate planning is so important, especially when someone's health is unpredictable." The way she said unpredictable bothered me. It was too casual, too knowing. When Maria came to take our drink orders, Sandra was quick to speak up. "You and Marcus have discussed my financial situation?" I asked, feigning surprise. Sandra blushed prettily, as if embarrassed by her own candor. "Oh, not in intricate detail. It's just that Marcus worries about providing for me should anything happen to him, and naturally, he assumes that if something were to happen to you." Her voice trailed off, assuming an appropriately sorrowful expression at the mere thought. "Of course," I said, playing along. "It's only natural for a young couple to contemplate these things." The kettle whistled, and Sandra poured the boiling water over the tea bag she had carefully placed in my favorite mug. I observed her intently as she prepared the concoction, searching for any additional substances she might surreptitiously add. She stirred in honey and a squeeze of lemon precisely as I preferred. "There you go," she said, extending the steaming mug toward me. "This should help you feel better." I accepted the mug but refrained from drinking immediately. "Sandra, may I ask you something?" "Of course, Alan. What is it?" "You've been so attentive to my health lately, bringing me vitamins, checking on my medications, ensuring I eat properly. It truly means a great deal. But I can't help but wonder, where did you acquire so much knowledge about caring for someone with health problems?" Sandra's smile remained firmly in place, but a flicker of something unreadable danced within her eyes. "Oh, I've always been fascinated by natural health remedies. My grandmother was incredibly knowledgeable about herbs and traditional medicines." "Is that where you learned about those vitamins you brought me? The ones supposedly designed to boost energy?"
Exactly.
Grandmother always maintained that modern medicine only addresses symptoms, whereas natural remedies have the power to heal the entire body holistically. I nodded thoughtfully. "You know, it's curious. I've been taking those vitamins for weeks now, but I haven't noticed any significant improvement." Sandra's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, like a fish gasping for air. "This is a mistake. I was trying to help him. Ask Alan. Tell them I was helping you." But as the handcuffs snapped shut around her wrists, Sandra's carefully constructed facade crumbled. The mask of concern and caring vanished completely, replaced by pure, unadulterated hatred. "You think you've won?" She hissed venomously at me. But Marcus will never forgive you for this. You've destroyed his marriage, his happiness. He'll hate you for the rest of his life. Maybe, I said quietly, meeting her hateful gaze unflinchingly. But at least he'll have a rest of his life. As they led Sandra away, I knew the most excruciating part was still to come. I had to break the news to my son, to tell him that the woman he loved, the woman he had built a life with, was in fact a serial killer who had been meticulously planning to murder his own father. But for the first time in months, I felt like I could finally breathe freely. The poison was out of my system, and the poisoner was finally in custody. I was alive, and I fully intended to stay that way. The phone call to Marcus was undoubtedly the most difficult conversation I'd ever had to endure. I waited until the next morning, after Sandra had been formally charged and the story had been verified by multiple independent news sources. I needed to be absolutely certain of my facts before I shattered my son's world into a million irreparable pieces. Dad. Marcus answered on the first ring, his voice tight with palpable worry. I heard Sandra didn't come home last night. Do you know where she is? Is she okay? Son, I need you to come over here. We need to talk, and it needs to be in person. Is it about Sandra? Did something happen to her? Just come over, Marcus.
Please.
An hour later, Marcus sat across from me in my living room, the very same room where Sandra had tried to administer what she intended to be my final, fatal dose of poison. Alan, you should try their house wine. It's supposed to be excellent. Actually, I think I'll stick with water tonight, I said. The medications I'm taking don't mix well with alcohol. Sandra's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course, you have to be careful. Marcus ordered a beer. Sandra chose a glass of the house red wine, and I asked for sparkling water with lemon. When Maria returned with our drinks, I noticed she seemed nervous, glancing frequently at our table, even when she was serving other customers. During dinner, Sandra continued to be overly attentive, insisting I try her appetizer, offering to share her entree, constantly asking if I needed anything. Her behavior was starting to feel suffocating rather than caring. You know what, I said suddenly. I think I will have a glass of wine after all, just a small one. Sandra's face lit up. Wonderful. Maria, she called to our waitress. Could we get another glass of the house red for my father-in-law? Maria nodded and headed toward the bar. I watched Sandra's reactions carefully, noting how she seemed more relaxed now that I had agreed to the alcohol. When Maria returned with my wine, she set it down with slightly shaking hands. Thank you, I said, lifting the glass. But as I brought it toward my lips, something extraordinary happened. Maria, who was clearing away our appetizer plates, leaned close to me and whispered so quietly I almost missed it. Excuse me, sir. Then, even more quietly, check your pocket. I froze, the wine glass halfway to my mouth. Maria had slipped something into my jacket pocket so smoothly, I barely felt it. She continued clearing the table as if nothing had happened, but I caught her eye for just a moment. She gave me the smallest, almost imperceptible nod. My hand trembled slightly as I set the wine glass back down without drinking. Actually, I think I should stick with water after all. This medication really doesn't mix well with alcohol. If anything, I sometimes feel worse after taking them. Sandra's grip tightened imperceptibly around her own teacup. Well, natural remedies can require time to take effect, and sometimes people experience a period of feeling worse before they ultimately feel better. It's referred to as a healing crisis. A healing crisis, I repeated, feigning ignorance. I've never encountered that term before. Oh yes, it's quite common. When the body commences detoxification, it can induce temporary symptoms, nausea, fatigue, confusion. But that's a positive sign. It indicates that the treatment is working effectively. I nearly laughed aloud at her audacity. She was casually describing the effects of the poison she had been administering and deceptively labeling it a healing crisis. That's absolutely fascinating, I said, marveling at her calculated deception. You seem remarkably knowledgeable about this. Have you engaged in formal study, or is this merely a personal hobby? Just a personal interest, Sandra replied a bit too quickly. I prefer to thoroughly research matters before recommending them to individuals I care about. I raised the tea mug to my lips, pretending to take a sip while actually merely allowing the liquid to touch my lips. This tea does taste different from what I typically drink. What precise blend is it? It's a special blend, Sandra replied, observing me intently. Chamomile, ginger, and a few other herbs that are beneficial for digestion. I had it custom-made at that health food store downtown. Which specific herbs, exactly? I pressed, maintaining my composure. I'm naturally curious about what I'm putting into my body, particularly given all the other medications I'm taking. Sandra waved her hand dismissively. Oh, just natural things. Nothing that would interact negatively with your prescriptions. I made sure of that. But her casual dismissal only amplified my suspicions. He looked haggard, his face etched with fatigue, as if he hadn't slept a wink all night. Dad, what's going on? Where's Sandra? I took a deep, steadying breath and proceeded to tell him everything. I started with the seemingly innocuous dinner at Romano's, Maria's cryptic warning, the gradual discovery of what Sandra had been surreptitiously adding to my vitamins and tea. I told him about Sandra's real name, her shocking history of dead husbands, and finally, the grim details of her arrest the night before. Marcus listened in stunned, unwavering silence, his face growing progressively paler with each horrifying revelation. When I finally finished speaking, he sat motionless for what felt like an eternity, staring blankly at his hands. You're telling me, he said slowly, carefully articulating each word as if trying to grasp the incomprehensible reality, that my wife is a serial killer who is trying to murder you for your money? I'm so incredibly sorry, son. I know how much this hurts. Marcus stood up abruptly and began pacing agitatedly around the room. This is insane. This is absolutely insane. Sandra loves me. She loves you too. She's been taking care of you for months. She was poisoning me for months. I corrected gently, but firmly. Everything she did was meticulously calculated to make me sick and ultimately to kill me.
But why?
We weren't even supposed to inherit that much. You always said you were leaving most of your money to charity. I winced slightly. That's what I told everyone. But my actual will left everything to you. Sandra somehow found out about the real terms. Marcus stopped pacing and stared at me, his eyes wide with disbelief. How much are we talking about? About $3 million plus the business and all the properties. Marcus sank heavily back into his chair, the full, crushing weight of Sandra's betrayal finally hitting him with the force of a physical blow. She married me for $3 million? Sandra's expression flickered with what might have been disappointment. Are you sure? Just a sip won't hurt. Better safe than sorry, I said, pushing the glass away from me. The rest of dinner passed in a haze. I made conversation, laughed at appropriate times, but my mind was racing. What had Maria put in my pocket? Why had she done it? And why did I have the sudden overwhelming instinct to trust this complete stranger over my own daughter-in-law? When we finished eating, I excused myself to use the restroom. In the privacy of the bathroom stall, I reached into my jacket pocket and found a small piece of paper folded several times. With trembling fingers, I unfolded it. The message was written in hurried handwriting. Do not drink anything she gives you. Meet me behind the restaurant in 10 minutes. Come alone. I stared at the note, my heart pounding so hard I was sure everyone in the restaurant could hear it. This confirmed my worst fears. Someone else had noticed something wrong with Sandra's behavior toward me. But who is this waitress, and how did she know? I flushed the toilet for appearances and returned to the table where Sandra and Marcus were discussing vacation plans for the upcoming summer. Dad, you should come with us to the Hamptons, Marcus was saying. The sea air might be good for your health. We'll see, I said, my mind elsewhere. I should probably get going soon. I'm feeling a bit tired. Sandra reached over and patted my hand. Of course, Alan, you need your rest, but please finish your wine first. You barely touched it. She was pushing the wine again. The note was right. I should not drink anything she gave me. I really can't, I said firmly. But thank you for a lovely evening. We paid the bill and said our goodbyes in the parking lot. I hugged Marcus genuinely, but when Sandra embraced me, I found myself wondering if this woman was trying to kill me. If she had genuinely researched potential interactions with my medications, she would know precisely which herbs were included in the tea. Sandra, I began carefully. I need to ask you something, and I hope you won't misunderstand. Of course, Alan. What is it? Have you ever added anything to the vitamins or tea you've been bringing me? Anything beyond what's listed on the label? The question hung heavily in the air between us, thick with unspoken accusations. Sandra's smile wavered for a fleeting moment, and I caught a glimpse of something cold and calculating flashing in her eyes before the pleasant mask snapped back into place. What a peculiar question, she said, her laughter sounding forced and hollow. Why would I ever do something like that? I don't know, I said, continuing to hold the untouched tea. It's just that my symptoms seem to worsen after I ingest the things you bring me, and I wondered if perhaps you were adding some kind of supplement or remedy that might not be agreeing with me. Sandra rose abruptly, moving to the sink to rinse her empty teacup with her back toward me. Alan, I think you're becoming a bit paranoid, she said, her tone dismissive. Perhaps that's simply one of your symptoms, confusion, suspicion. It's quite common in people with your condition. My condition? She turned back to face me, and for a split second, the mask completely vanished. The saccharine, caring expression was replaced by something calculating and ruthlessly cold. Men your age with your health problems, she said slowly, her voice dripping with subtle venom. It's only natural for the mind to start playing tricks, causing you to become suspicious of those who are trying to help you. There was a veiled threat hidden beneath those words, a subtle suggestion that my mental state was deteriorating. I am so deeply sorry, son. I wish I could have protected you from this. The next few hours were absolutely devastating. Marcus alternated between vehement denial, incandescent rage, and a grief so profound and heart-wrenching that it broke my heart to witness. He had genuinely, deeply loved Sandra, and the devastating realization that their entire relationship had been a carefully constructed lie was utterly destroying him. How did I not see it? He kept asking, his voice filled with anguish and self-reproach. How could I live with someone for 3 years and not know who she really was? Because she's a professional, I said, offering him the only comfort I could. This is what she does. She studies her targets, learns exactly what they want to hear, and then becomes that person. You fell in love with an illusion, a carefully crafted persona that she created specifically for you. Detective Collins stopped by that afternoon to provide us with an update on the case. The contents of the bottle Sandra had brought me the night before had tested positive for a highly concentrated mixture of dioxin and several other powerful cardiac medications, enough to induce immediate heart failure. She brought enough to kill at least 3 people, Collins said grimly. If you had ingested even half of that bottle, you would have been dead within minutes. Miguel Vega had also provided crucial testimony. He had provided medical records that unequivocally demonstrated that Robert had exhibited the exact same symptoms I had been experiencing, following the same timeline and progression. We've also been in contact with police departments in 2 other cities where Sandra's previous husbands died, Collins continued. They're reopening those cases based on the evidence we've gathered here. How many people do you think she's killed? Marcus asked, his voice hollow and filled with a chilling sense of dread. We may never know for sure, Collins admitted somberly. After they drove away, I waited 5 minutes, then walked around to the back of the restaurant. Maria was there, smoking a cigarette with shaking hands. When she saw me, she immediately stubbed it out. Mr. Holloway, she said. I wasn't sure you'd come. How do you know my name? I asked. She looked around nervously, as if making sure we were alone. Because I know who she is, she said quietly. Your daughter-in-law. I know what she's been doing to you. My blood turned to ice. What do you mean? Maria took a deep breath. My name is Maria Santos. Sandra is my cousin. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I gripped the brick wall behind me for support. Your cousin? She doesn't know I work here. We haven't spoken in years, but I recognized her the moment she walked in with you tonight. Maria's voice was barely above a whisper. Mr. Holloway, you're in terrible danger. I felt like I was drowning. Tell me everything you know. Maria glanced around again, then looked directly into my eyes.
Sandra isn't who she says she is.
Her real name is Sandra Vega, and she's done this before. The man she was married to before your son. He died suddenly. Natural causes, they said, but the family suspected. She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Suspected what? I demanded. Suspected she poisoned him, but they could never prove it. He was older, had some health issues. It looked like a heart attack brought on by stress and age. My knees felt weak. Why are you telling me this? Tears started forming in Maria's eyes. Because I can't let her do it again. I've been watching her tonight, seeing how she acts around you. It's the same pattern. She gets close to older men with money, makes them dependent on her. Then she wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I couldn't live with myself if I stayed silent. Do you have any proof? I asked. Maria shook her head. Nothing that would hold up in court, but I know Sandra. I grew up with her. If I were to die now, Sandra could easily claim that I had been paranoid and confused in my final days, effectively casting doubt on anything I might have said against her. Is that your professional opinion? I asked quietly. Sandra's eyes narrowed imperceptibly. I'm merely suggesting that perhaps you should be more grateful for the people who care about you instead of questioning their motives. And what if someone's motives weren't as pure as they seemed? I pressed further. What if someone was merely pretending to care while, in reality, making me sick? The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken accusations. Sandra stared at me for a long moment, and I could almost see her mind racing, calculating, attempting to assess how much I actually knew. Finally, she smiled again, but this time it was different, sharper, more predatory. That would be truly terrible, wouldn't it? She said softly. If someone were betraying your trust in such a manner. But who would do such a thing? And more importantly, who would believe such a wild accusation? The threat was now unmistakable. She was directly implying that even if I managed to decipher her scheme, no one would ever believe me. I suppose you're right, I said, carefully setting down the still full tea mug. It does sound rather far-fetched. Sandra relaxed slightly, believing she had regained control of the precarious situation. Exactly. Now, why don't you drink your tea before it gets cold? You know how much better you feel after you have it. Actually, I'm not feeling particularly thirsty right now, I replied. Perhaps I'll save it for later. Sandra's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Alan, the tea is most effective when consumed hot. Cold herbal tea simply doesn't possess the same therapeutic properties. I'm sure it will be fine, I insisted, holding my ground. We stared at each other for a tense moment, locked in a silent battle of wills. But based on her established pattern and the financial records we've uncovered, we suspect at least 4 or 5 victims over the past 10 years. The thought that Sandra had been perfecting her method on other unsuspecting families, on other grieving sons who had lost their fathers to her insatiable greed, filled me with a sickening wave of rage. At least now, she would never be able to hurt anyone ever again. Sandra's trial took place 8 months later. I testified at length about my increasingly debilitating symptoms, the seemingly innocuous vitamins and tea she had been giving me, and the terrifying events of the final night, when she had brought the concentrated poison, fully intending for me to drink it. Miguel testified about his brother Robert's agonizing death and Sandra's suspicious behavior in the immediate aftermath. However, the most damning testimony came from the forensic accountants who had meticulously analyzed Sandra's complex financial transactions. They presented a clear and undeniable pattern. She would systematically research wealthy men, engineer seemingly accidental meetings with them or their children, establish intimate relationships, and then slowly and methodically poison them, all while subtly positioning herself to inherit their assets. It turned out that she had been married 6 times, not 4, as we had initially believed. 2 husbands had divorced her before she could fully execute her plans, but 4 had died under undeniably suspicious circumstances. The insurance payouts and inheritances she had collected over the years totaled over $8 million. Sandra displayed absolutely no remorse throughout the entire trial. She vehemently maintained her innocence, claiming she was a caring and compassionate woman who was being framed by paranoid, misogynistic men who simply couldn't accept a strong, independent female in their lives. She's always been calculating, always looking for the easy way to get what she wants. When I heard she had married again to someone with money, she shuddered. How long has she been? How long do you think she's been doing this to me? Probably months, Maria said. She's patient. She makes it look gradual, natural. Small doses of something that mimics common health problems in older men: fatigue, confusion, nausea. Eventually, it would look like a heart attack or a stroke. I felt sick to my stomach, and not from any poison. My own daughter-in-law had been slowly killing me, and my son had no idea. What should I do? I asked. Maria reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a business card. This is my friend's number. She's a nurse who works with poison control. She might be able to help you figure out what Sandra's been using and how to test for it. I took the card with numb fingers.
Thank you, Maria.
You may have just saved my life. As I drove home that night, my mind was reeling with the implications of what I had learned. Sandra had married my son, not for love, but as part of an elaborate plan to inherit my money. She had been slowly poisoning me for months, waiting for me to die so she could claim whatever inheritance came her way. But now I knew the truth, and if Sandra thought she was going to get away with murder, she was about to learn that this old construction worker was tougher than she had bargained for. The question was, what was I going to do about it? The next morning, I sat in my kitchen, staring at the business card Maria had given me. Nurse Jennifer Walsh, Poison Control Specialist. My hands were still shaking as I dialed her number. This was real. I was actually calling someone to find out if my daughter-in-law had been poisoning me. Jennifer answered on the third ring, her voice professional but warm. After I explained the situation, she agreed to meet me that afternoon at her office. Sandra was determined to have me drink the tea, and I was equally determined to refuse. The tension in the room was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. Finally, Sandra forced another smile. Well, I suppose I should be going. Marcus will be home soon, and I need to start preparing dinner. Of course, I said, rising and walking her toward the door. Thank you for the visit and for the tea. Don't forget to drink it, she said, gripping my arm just a little too tightly. I went to a great deal of trouble to ensure it was exactly what you needed. As I closed the door behind her, I realized that Sandra had, in essence, confessed. She had meticulously prepared something specifically for me, something she was insistent that I consume, something that would purportedly provide me with precisely what she believed I needed. What Sandra truly believed I needed was to die. The pressing question now was whether I had managed to capture enough incriminating evidence on tape to convince Detective Collins to make an arrest, or whether I would be compelled to escalate this perilous game even further. Within an hour of Sandra's departure, Detective Collins and his team had arrived at my house to meticulously review the recording. They huddled around a small device in my living room, listening intently to every word exchanged between Sandra and me. This is promising, Detective Collins said, pausing the playback. Her insistence that you drink the tea, her elaborate knowledge of your symptoms, and particularly that comment about going to a great deal of trouble to ensure it was exactly what you needed. However, a skilled defense attorney could argue that she was merely being exceptionally caring. My heart sank. So, it's not enough? It's circumstantial. We require something more concrete. Either we catch her possessing the poison itself, or we need a clearer, more direct confession. She even went so far as to suggest that I had intentionally poisoned myself in order to frame her because I disapproved of my son's marriage. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Sandra Elena Vargas was found guilty on all counts: attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and fraud. Due to the multiple victims and the meticulously premeditated nature of her heinous crimes, she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As they led her away in handcuffs, Sandra looked directly at me. There was no fake smile this time, no contrived pretense of caring, just pure, unadulterated, cold, calculating hatred. You think you've won, she mouthed silently, her lips barely moving. But you've destroyed your son's life. I stared back at her, unmoved, utterly impervious to her futile attempt to wound me. She was wrong. I hadn't destroyed Marcus's life. I had saved it. And more importantly, I had saved my own. The months following the trial were incredibly difficult for Marcus. He struggled with crippling depression and overwhelming guilt, constantly blaming himself for not recognizing Sandra's true, malevolent nature. He sought professional help, going to therapy regularly, and gradually began the long and arduous process of healing. But the traumatic experience had changed him fundamentally, leaving an indelible mark on his psyche. "I don't think I'll ever truly trust my judgment about people again," he confessed to me one evening as we sat on my back porch watching the sunset. "That's not necessarily a bad thing," I replied gently. "A little healthy skepticism never hurt anyone. Your mother used to always say that people will eventually show you who they really are if you simply pay attention. The key is learning to pay attention."
How did you know, Dad?
"What made you so suspicious when I couldn't see it?" I pondered that question for a long time, carefully considering my response. "Experience, maybe. Bring any medications you've been taking, any supplements, anything Sandra might have had access to," she instructed. I spent the morning gathering everything I could think of. The vitamins Sandra had bought for me last month, claiming they would help with my energy levels, the herbal tea she'd been bringing me when I felt nauseous, even the bottle of antacids she'd insisted I keep by my bedside. Jennifer's office was in a medical building downtown. She was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical bun. She listened to my story without judgment, taking notes as I described my symptoms and the timeline of Sandra's increased presence in my life. "The symptoms you're describing could be consistent with several different substances," she said, examining the bottles I'd brought. "Arsenic is the classic choice because it's hard to detect and mimics natural illness, but there are others. Small doses of certain medications can cause similar effects." She held up the vitamin bottle Sandra had given me. "Mind if I test these?" 20 minutes later, she returned from her lab with a grim expression. "Mr. Holloway, these vitamins have been tampered with. There are traces of digoxin, a heart medication that can be extremely dangerous in the wrong doses. Too much can cause nausea, confusion, fatigue, and eventually cardiac arrest." My worst fears were confirmed. Sandra had been poisoning me slowly, methodically, making it look like I was dying of natural causes related to age and stress. "How long would this take to kill someone?" I asked. "Depends on the dosage and frequency. Based on what you've described, I'd say she's been giving you just enough to make you sick, maybe planning to increase the dose gradually. If you hadn't figured this out." She didn't need to finish the sentence. I thanked Jennifer and left her office feeling like I was walking through a nightmare. My phone rang as I was getting into my car. It was Marcus. "Hey, Dad." Officer Martinez, a woman in her 30s who specialized in cases involving domestic poisoning, spoke up. "Mr. Holloway, has Sandra ever mentioned anything about her past, previous relationships, family members who have died, anything that might potentially reveal a discernible pattern?" I recalled the conversation I had with Maria. According to her cousin, Sandra had been married previously. Her first husband had died suddenly, supposedly of natural causes, although his family had harbored strong suspicions of poisoning. Detective Collins and Officer Martinez exchanged knowing glances. "Do you happen to know the husband's name, when and where he died?" "I can certainly ask Maria for more specific details." "Please do so immediately," Collins instructed. "If we can establish a pattern of suspicious deaths surrounding Sandra, it will significantly strengthen our case." That evening, I met Maria at a small diner across town. She appeared visibly nervous, constantly glancing around as if expecting Sandra to materialize at any moment. "His name was Robert Vega," she told me quietly. "He died 3 years ago in Phoenix. Sandra inherited his house and approximately $200,000 in life insurance." "What were the circumstances surrounding his death?" I inquired. "Heart attack, supposedly. But Robert was only 45 years old and generally in good health. His brother, Miguel, has never believed that his death was natural. He said Robert had been complaining of feeling sick for weeks prior to his death. Nausea, fatigue, confusion. Asterisks sound familiar?" Asterisk, it sounded eerily similar to what I had been experiencing. Did Miguel ever report his suspicions to the police? He attempted to, but there was no concrete evidence. The coroner ruled it a heart attack, and Sandra had already relocated by the time Miguel began aggressively questioning the circumstances. Do you think Miguel would be willing to speak with the police here? Maria nodded. Years of dealing with unscrupulous contractors who tried to cheat me, untrustworthy employees who stole from me, people who smiled to my face while simultaneously planning to stab me in the back. But also, I think it was because Sandra wasn't actually trying to fool me. She was trying to kill me. It's often much easier to spot someone's true intentions when they're literally trying to poison you. Marcus managed a weak, mirthless laugh. I guess that's one way to develop good instincts about people. About a year after Sandra's conviction, Marcus met someone new. Jennifer was a teacher, kind and genuinely caring in a way that was completely different from Sandra's calculated, almost theatrical charm. She knew all about Sandra and what had happened, but she didn't allow it to define how she saw Marcus, or to cloud her judgment of his character. She's the real thing, Marcus told me, his eyes shining with newfound hope when he brought her to dinner for the very first time. I can tell because she's not even trying to impress me. She's just herself. Watching Marcus with Jennifer, seeing him slowly and cautiously learn to trust again, was one of the most deeply satisfying experiences of my life. Sandra had desperately tried to destroy my family, but in the end, she had only inadvertently made us stronger, more resilient, and more appreciative of the precious bonds that held us together. As for me, my health improved dramatically once the poison was completely out of my system. The mysterious and debilitating symptoms that had plagued me for months simply vanished, as if they had never existed. I had energy again, clarity of thought, and most importantly, a profound sense of peace of mind. I made some long overdue changes to my will. Real changes this time, carefully designed to prevent any future attempts at exploitation. Sandra wanted me to call and check on you. She said you seemed really tired last night at dinner. The irony was sickening. Sandra was checking on me to see how well her poison was working. I'm fine, son, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Just taking things easy today. Good. Oh, and Sandra mentioned she'd like to bring you some homemade soup this afternoon. She's worried you're not eating enough. More poison, delivered with a smile and a concerned expression. That's very thoughtful of her, but I'm actually feeling much better today. Maybe another time. There was a pause. Dad, Sandra's really trying, you know. I think she genuinely cares about you. If only he knew how much she cared about inheriting my money. That evening, I called Harold Brennan, my lawyer, and scheduled an emergency meeting for Monday morning. I needed to change my will immediately, but I also needed to be strategic about it. If Sandra suspected I knew what she was doing, she might accelerate her timeline or try something more direct. I spent the weekend doing research. I called Maria and asked her to meet me again. This time, she brought a friend, Detective Ray Collins, someone she'd known since high school who now worked for the police department. Maria told me about your situation, Detective Collins said as we sat in a coffee shop across town. Unfortunately, poisoning cases are incredibly difficult to prove unless we catch the person in the act or find the poison in their possession. So, Sandra could just get away with this? Not necessarily, but we need evidence. Has she been in your house recently? Has she had access to your food or medications? I thought about it. She brings meals sometimes. She knows where I keep my medications. She even has a spare key to my house. Marcus gave it to her in case of emergencies. Detective Collins exchanged a look with Maria. That's good. I believe he'd be incredibly relieved to know that someone was finally investigating Sandra. He's been plagued with guilt for years about not being able to prove what she did to his brother. I provided Maria with Detective Collins's contact information and requested that she arrange for Miguel to call him as soon as possible. If we could conclusively establish that Sandra had engaged in such behavior before, it would greatly fortify our case. I left a substantial sum to Marcus and Jennifer, enough to ensure their financial security without making them so exorbitantly wealthy that they might attract another Sandra. The rest of my considerable fortune went to carefully vetted organizations that provided crucial support to victims of domestic violence and financial fraud. I also established a foundation in Eleanor's name, dedicated to providing free legal assistance to families who suspected their loved ones had been murdered, but simply couldn't afford to conduct a thorough investigation. If Miguel Vega had been able to hire a skilled private investigator or obtain competent legal counsel when Robert tragically died, Sandra might have been stopped long before she ever got to me. If she's keeping poison at your house, we might be able to find it, but we'd need a search warrant, and for that, we need probable cause. What if I could get her to confess? I asked.